Welcome, everybody, to the 5 panel. I think that many of you know the way I do the panels is a little different. I do teaching panels because my focus is on not just looking at the passion and the fixation. There are other panels that have done that. The information is there. But instead, I'd rather talk about the worldview of the type and then how they respond to that. And in this case, the 5's response, I will see micro expressions, or they'll use a word, perhaps, or a phrase that's indicative of an aspect of type 5 that I will then explain. So my goal is to always teach more about what it's like internally for the 5 in this case, but all my panels have been focused on that. So the fundamentals get out there, but it's more meaningful and easier to understand others if we understand their worldview and why they're feeling that way on an emotional level, not just the intellectual level. So I'm really trying to engage the head, the heart, and the belly, and what happens when those come together. I've been working with the Enneagram 36 years now and just became fascinated by it. My whole life, and in particular, my whole career, I've taken everything I could find on personality typologies. I had to manage a lot of people at one time, and I had to hire and train. And I wanted the formulas and to understand how to make that as easy as possible so that I wouldn't have to keep doing it over and over again. Because for me, it meant traveling. And I learned a fabulous system for interviewing that is just amazing at kind of putting together what we think of when we're asked directly, what 5 words would you use to describe yourself? And most of us have not thought about that. So the first time we do it, we're retrieving adjectives that we strongly identify with, or we've heard other people say about us. And so in the case of the Enneagram, I used that same formula with the questionnaire. If you've taken my latest test that came out in 2020, but I keep upgrading it and doing things to it, so it changes all the time. I'm about ready for version 9. My main focus, as I said, is to get to the heart of the type. And believe it or not, even though 5s will be seen as more distant in some ways because they use isolation as a defense strategy, they still have a way in which they experience their heart. There are brain cells in the head, heart, and gut. And it really is enriching to understand the ways in which the 5 does that. I know personally the 5s that I have in my life, they will show love or appreciation or friendship by sharing their expertise. And many times they will actually do something for me unasked for. And we don't think of the 5 that way by the descriptions in the books, because the books are focused on the passions, the fixations, and in some cases, some books have included the convictions of the belly and the core fears, idealized image. So I work with all of them. And I will be mentioning Tritype. And for those of you who don't know, there's more on Tritype at katherinefauvre.com. But the way we will look at it is by type, and then I'll just reference the others accordingly, weave it in. But there are all kinds of variables depending on those 3 types. And that concept of Tritype emerged for me in my first research study. It was on the internal experience of type, and I was looking at what made the types different from one another. And I thought it was going to be mostly subtype, but I found instead that in the case of the types and the subtypes, there was a stacking order, that people were identifying with the core fears of 3 Enneagram types, not just one, but there was a hierarchy. And initially I thought it was because they had a type as wing type or a line of connection. But when it was getting to be a very high percentage of people that had no connection to the other types, I knew it was meaningful. And if we consider that in the Enneagram of motion, which is the one we use, the symbol we recognize, there's a split between 5 and 4 because it's incorporating the law of 0 or 1, and then the law of 3, 3, 6, 9, and then the law of 7, 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, and return to 1. So when you put those together, you get a dynamic perspective. It's universal, which is why I believe Ichazo used that symbol and why Gurdjieff used that symbol, because there is a 9-pointed Enneagram in existence, couldn't be found for a long time. In fact, I didn't see it until Arthur sent it to me. I had just created a symbol for my Enneagram types because I realized all these connections that all of us can get to every other type, but when and how. And there's some types that are much more distant because we don't use them or those defense strategies as much as we do our top 3, and in particular, the lead type of the top 3. So hopefully that'll help you as we go through the types. But first, let's introduce them. Suzanne, where you live, what you do, and when you found the Enneagram.
Okay, that could be a very long story, but I'll make it short. So I live in Denmark, so this is where I'm based. I've been working with the Enneagram for more than 20 years. I teach the Enneagram and I do one-on-one coaching. So I met Katherine, I believe it's 10 years ago or so, and was very fascinated by the Tritype constellation because it made really sense in terms of both the people that I was coaching who seemed to really relate to this, having one type in each center that played into whatever behavior it was. So this is a little bit about me.
Excellent. I think it was 12 years ago.
Yeah, maybe.
Jim.
Jim Farnham. I live in Utah. I'm retired as a research statistician. Let me see, I found the Enneagram about 20 years ago, I guess. And I don't teach it, but I use it in my life and with my friends.
And you helped Spencer with his research on conflict with the TKI and the
yeah. So I've helped
a
number of people with statistical questions. But statistics was something I could do, but it's not my first love. I really enjoy understanding how people tick. Currently, I'm involved with men's work, and we do weekly groups with other men.
Great.
And that's been very fulfilling.
I bet. Yeah, he's a lot of fun.
That's about it.
Okay.
Thanks.
And Arthur.
I was introduced to the Enneagram essentially July 4th weekend of 2007 when I was wandering around Boston and Cambridge at used bookstores, and I came across a copy of Risso's first edition of Personality Types. And I just read a few pages, then I read a few more pages, and I few more pages, and after a while, I figured I had to buy the book. And by the end of that summer, I'd already taken one of those workshops with
Don and Rusty?
With Russ Hudson in Pennsylvania. And then I just did a deep dive with the Riso Hudson Institute and learned about the Enneagram. I'm a psychiatrist, so it was kind of like a different way of looking at things instead of purely medical or purely kind of Freudian. And it also seemed to explain kind of blind spots. In fact, my inability at times to accurately assess someone's character. Some people are a bit more chameleon than others. I thought it explained a lot of other people and their motivations. So I've been into it since then and attended a lot of conferences. At one point became very active in doing a few presentations at the IEAs and writing a few articles in an Enneagram Monthly and stuff like that. Then I started a Facebook group called Enneagram Daily, which grew, and then a lot of people in that group started other groups, and I kind of phased out of it.
That's true.
In part because I'm not really a good host. I really didn't enjoy it. I did it out of interest, but I swear there's people who are better at hosting.
And monitoring, there's a lot that goes into it.
Yes.
Sure.
I let a lot of free thought reign, and you really can't do that these days in social media.
Especially when people are not showing who they are. It's even more important now. If you know who they are, then maybe they can be professional or not. But I find a lot of the unrest, so to speak, or conflicts are often that people are not showing themselves equally. Like they're maybe not even using their name or a picture or the website. They'll create their Facebook page, but it's all disguised. So it's just a little different. And I found a lot of those comments that are disruptive in a way come from people that are not truly engaged.
Well, I actually think I read an article once saying that the reason people are so discourteous in social media is because they can't be hit in the face for what they said.
Yeah, exactly. And they can't be thought of in that way. Yeah. Oh, right. There are things that people never do in person that they do on social media.
Yes.
Thank you, Arthur. Arlen.
More or less 35 years ago, I was in New York City and volunteering. And this is why, when we get to me, you'll hear about why we're going for the social part. I was volunteering, volunteer at large at Yahoo, send me some stuff, at the New York Open Center, which if people know the background for that, it was more or less Findhorn, then over to Omega Institute, and then New York Open Center. And I wound up being I use the term very loosely, the assistant to Don Riso. This was before Russ, okay? And I've been around with everybody and carrying on, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the story with that. I'm now in Provincetown, where we have a very, very low level of COVID. And let's keep that. Okay, Provincetown, that's Cape Cod. Or for us vegans, I'm a 42-year vegan, by the way, 47 non-dairy, Cape Cod. Okay.
Well, let me ask you this. When did you come to California when I met you? What year was that?
Well, it's in and out. So that was about, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago. So I'm a traveler.
Longer, might be longer.
Yeah, it could be longer.
Yeah.
The thing is that normally I've been to like 95 countries, and so I'm all about travel and stuff. By the way, should I just answer the question or keep going?
Which question?
Any question.
Yeah, no, I'll ask the
Okay.
questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's that. I would be traveling now, except for the realities. My last trip was to the Antarctic. Okay.
Excellent. Okay, let me read just a small paragraph on the 5. I promise to do this for those of you who don't know the way the research revealed aspects that are very key to each type. So I will read this. The investigative person, the observer, the thinker, the sage, or the wise person. But I need to add that 6s can identify themselves as an investigative person, but it's a very different way of investigating. And a lot of 9s like wise person. So both 5 and 9. And if someone happens to have 5 and 9 in the Tritype, they're really inclined to see wise person as what they'd like to be. An overall summary description is 5s are frugal, self-sufficient, private people. They are detached from feelings and focus on data, information, knowledge, and thoughtful analysis. 5s dislike intrusions on their time, energy, and space. They avoid obligations and emotional entanglements. They are attracted to learning and desire a clear mind. The worldview is knowledge will keep me safe. I need privacy to think and reflect on my energies. And I think, therefore, I am. Now, Arlen, you just addressed something important that many 5s are into technology, but not all 5s are. What's meaningful is that the 5 uses their intelligence and their processing style to manage their reality. But they may be good at one thing and struggle with another. They may be able to bring disparate facts together, and those facts may have to do with people. They can do so in an impersonal way to have a better evaluation, and that analysis is ongoing. Sometimes 5s will find something that answers a lot of what they're going for, and then they will stop. But in my experience, they'll then diversify into something else that they want to master. But overall, 5s will pursue what they're interested in a very, very deep manner so that they can be an expert. Now, they also are struggling with this need for self-sufficiency so they can manage what they need in the way of time and energy and resources, regardless of the instinct. So that phrase, emotional entanglements, is very particular. It's not saying that they avoid emotions. They just avoid entanglements and things that are complicated and stressful, and there are expectations. They don't want to have to worry about disappointing people, not meeting expectations, and they need to refuel, and they work at their own pace. So a 5 may work through the night if they're pursuing an idea or a concept and they want to delve deeply into it. So holding on to their own personal time and being able to govern that is needed, because otherwise they can burn out. And most 5s feel like they could never have enough of their own time. Now, this does not suggest that they only want to be alone. What is meant by the clear mind is that the 5 describes themselves as having very permeable boundaries, and that if people are talking nearby about something and it distracts the 5, they don't feel like they can think clearly. And since the 5 uses their mind to survive, it can cause a lot of distress. And it's when the 5 can just flare up, a little porcupine, and it's unexpected because a lot of times the 5 is just fluidly moving away when it's too much. But if we understand the emotional need to feel anchored, and like I really liked the way Naranjo described the 5 struggling with retentiveness. And it's like the holding in, the holding on, and sociability. Can I be social in this way? Or is that uncomfortable? Or wait, I wasn't social in the right way. I've also had a lot of 5s report that they feel like they didn't get the training manual on how to be interacting with others. And then, they could figure it out, but it wasn't as spontaneous. They approached relationships, even their own family relationships, in the same way as they would anything. And they'd want to know a lot about it, and they'd want to keep things from overwhelming them, intruding. And that's why more than anything, the 5 has an unconscious and often conscious fear of invasion. And emotional entanglements that are emotions gone awry feel like entanglements that the 5 cannot get away from. I think it would be good to start right there. Suzanne, do you relate to any of this and the need for self-sufficiency, privacy, and avoiding negative emotional entanglements?
Yes, I do. I was noting what you said about being disrupted by noises, for example, and I have really a noise allergic somehow. If there's some noise in the background of where I sit, it takes my focus and my attention, and it's really annoying. And so I definitely relate to that, being sort of sensitive in a strange way to that. And about having a manual for how to be in the world. Now I've been training for many years, and I'm teaching, so I don't have a problem standing in front of an audience as such, especially if I talk about something I know. But I sometimes struggle with where to put my hands. It's like they're just there in the way, nowhere to put them.
Standing and teaching?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I think people would probably like me to put my hands down, but
yeah. So it would be nice if there was a manual to where to put your hands while you are standing up there. So yeah.
Without a microphone, that if you have a microphone, it makes it a little easier. But
it does.
You don't know probably how you have touched on something that many 5s have told me about the hands. Like, when is it going to look awkward? Where should I put it? And as a sexual 5, it would be very important to feel more secure in your attractiveness and desirability if that was all comfortable and you knew what to do. Socially, of course, with a lot of people, no one wants to be awkward or have difficulties. But would you say that you, as a sexual 5, also, and an INTJ for that matter, are really aware of when things feel like an emotional entanglement or there's going to be some sort of obligation. And think about when you were younger, before you knew the Enneagram, and when you were a kid. Like, did you ever just like move away?
A lot, especially because I grew up in a family where there was a lot of quarreling, discussion, debate. And so I remember choosing my room in the house when we moved in to be at the end of the house where, I could just hide in that room, in that corner, away from whatever was distracting and disturbing. So definitely a strong desire to withdraw and be on my own and just leave the rest of the world behind, so to speak, and try to figure out my own emotions in that, in my own space. And I really remember many times early in life how I was struggling between what is this that I'm feeling? How do I need to voice it? I didn't feel like voicing it, but sometimes, I remember my mother asked me what's going on, and I said, I don't know. It's just everything. I don't know. Can't describe it. I can't explain it.
What did it feel like? How did you get the knowledge or information that you even would consider your emotions? What type of situations or circumstances would cause you to want to understand your emotions?
Well, it could be, for example, if my sister, who is a 4, was very reactive emotionally about things, and I tried to relate to that and understand what was going on by sensing into myself, how do I feel about this? And it was very difficult to find out, because I tend to go to my head and ask the questions up there. How's that? And what would that be like?
Yeah. What kind of question do you, when you go to your head, what kind of question are you asking? Like when your sister would be really intense?
Why is the reaction so strong? Why does she start crying right now? Would I start crying at this point? No, I don't think so. But then again, when would I start crying if I was to cry? So, yeah.
It's a great example, little mini snapshot of thoughtful analysis, like wanting to understand the parts, the individual parts that will give you a better understanding of the big picture. And that's something that 5s are very gifted at. Their innate ability, in my opinion, to use both inductive and deductive reasoning and going from the little part to the bigger concept and back. And so a lot of times when people identify with being smart, it may not be the way they are smart. Maybe they're good at studying and giving what's needed, but they're not naturally going from concept to the parts and then what's relative to that, which is what 5s naturally do. Now, all types could potentially do this, but if we were to make a generalization, 5s as a group will do this more than any other group, any other type. I happen to do that as well, but it's more atypical for 8s. Having said that, 8s want to know what makes people tick. They're just a variation on 5, not for sociability and to see what's going on and to be able to be the observer. It's more by joining it and asking and going bigger. Whereas the 5 is going to, in a way, retreat to their mind, I'm going here, to their mind, and then start analyzing what they're seeing, especially if it causes disruption in the ability just to pursue what interests you. So, yeah, that would be a great example of emotional entanglements, especially if you had to be involved all the time or it would catch you off guard. Whereas fours, on the other hand, can be emotionally hijacked by anything in the present that reminded them of something painful in their past. So a 5 and a 4 together in that way would seem very, very different. And they are, even if you're family members, even if you have the same Myers-Briggs type and the same instinct, it would show up differently. Okay, thank you, Suzanne. Jim, what do you relate to about them? Any of the self-sufficiency, the emotional entanglements, the isolation?
So I do recall being pretty young and deciding that my parents really didn't have a clue how to live life, and I was going to have to figure it out myself. I'm a very 4-ish 5. It would have been nice if I could control my emotions. I would have loved that, but I've never been very successful. In grade school, I was the kid who had all the buttons that kids pushed, and I was, but because of that, I think that kind of led to the becoming more of an observer. Like, I can't figure out how these kids get along with each other. So I better sort of try to figure it out, and then I can copy. Because it didn't make sense.
It didn't make sense. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it didn't come naturally. So, and as far as emotional entanglements,
and they would be those not of your choosing. Like in relationship, we could have that.
Yeah.
Like partnership, parent-child.
Yeah, I have ended friendships where, with especially with this particular two, who would always like get me involved in something, and then it turns out that the expectations were different than what I thought I was signing up for.
Yeah.
And I eventually ended the friendship because it was just, there was no predictability to it. And I was always felt like I was like in a position where I couldn't choose to be and do what I wanted. I was trapped, and I did not like that. I think the other thing about
hold on one second. I really want to highlight that. 5s feel trapped as well. And some ways even more trapped than 7s. But 7s are consciously aware of many things feeling like a trap and that will limit them. 5 has a line to 7, but both 5 and 7 are focused on the feeling of being limited and unable to do what you want to do. Both 5 and 7 are very focused on pursuing what is of interest. And if you're obligated to something, it's curtailed. You don't have enough time for yourself to do what you want.
Yeah, that's part of it. The other part, though, is being overwhelmed and overextended, being put into places where, this is just too much. But I can't retreat. I can't get out of here. So, and I think another part about the observer or the trying to keep things simple is that I can't multitask. I can't shift my attention from one thing to another very easily. And so interruptions are very frustrating because it's going to take me so long to try to get my head back to where it was. So I think that's, I don't know, anything else you wanted to ask?
Well, what I'd like to do is take that a little deeper from the standpoint of what you do when you find yourself overwhelmed in a situation that you can't get out of. How do you manage that? What are you feeling? What actions are you taking?
Makes me angry. And I can get very bristly if I can't somehow graciously exit.
Bristly's a great word. It's like when I was saying that, it's like a
yeah.
And it kind of comes out all over, but it doesn't go giant. But it's very definite.
It's intense. People tell me it's very intense.
Yes, it is, especially with the sexual instinct.
And they can be very intimidated by it. So I'm not so much that way anymore. I'm, gentle and quiet and peaceful.
Well, with 9 and 5, that is the desire to have those things.
Oh, of interest, you were talking about the why.
The sexual is kind of spicy.
Yeah, there's some spice there. But so in my men's work, we have animal totem names, and mine was Wise Owl.
There you go. So
but
great.
It's also Wise Ass Owl.
Yeah. So. And is that because of your sense of humor or something else?
Yeah. Yeah, there's I don't know, there's a little self-deprecation there, but there is something about I like to spice things up. I like to break the script, so to speak. It gives me a little zing.
Yeah, more iconoclastic. There's just more of it's how the rebellion will show up.
Yeah.
Of the whole head center. You might give your kind of power to a reference, a concept, not necessarily to a person, but it can happen that way. But usually it's to a conceptual idea or material that you consider valuable. And you can even rebel against that and say, well, this isn't any good anymore, and go in pursuit of something that is a better version of a philosopher's stone, because that's what the 5 wants, is that perfect key or formula to know how to do things in a way that you don't have to deal with all the negative emotions, that your negative emotions, their negative emotions. And so when you have 4, 5, 9 leading with 5 and a 5 with a 4 wing, it amplifies the 4 in your defense strategy because you've got it from 2 different angles. And and probably your 4 has a 5 wing as well. So having said that, there is arrogance that arises that isn't even conscious most of the time. Can you share a little bit about that? How you see, because 5 is arrogant, 4 is arrogant. And so the 4, 5, 9 is arrogant, but most do not see it.
Yes. In my career, there were times when I would stand up in front of a whole room full of PhDs, and I had no problem at all with that, because I thought I was just as smart as everybody in the room. And, which probably wasn't true, but at the time that seemed, I never doubted my intellectual capability until life threw such curves and difficulties to me that I became firmly convinced that my 5 strategy was bankrupt. And now I'm working on just trusting life as it comes. I don't need to know everything. So
your micro expressions, we're not totally sold on that, but you're probably in process, because when we do this work, we do see old problems in a new way. And that's why I find the Enneagram so valuable. And I completely changed careers and went deeply into the Enneagram, because you could take these really rigid patterns that we have from growing up, whatever they may be, and see them with fresh eyes and understand more about what we experienced and what was age appropriate, as well as what other people experience. What has been great fun for me personally is that I introduced the Enneagram to kids that were in my group in high school. And we talk about it. And so if we get together at reunions or whatever, I didn't realize this is what was going on for you. You needed to be admired for your straight A's. And I was flippant. So yes, I would say that we shift and change our behavior because we're more aligned and understand more what's going on. But also there's a part where we do become exhausted using the defense strategy over and over and over again, that we need a break. But it's still there. The desire to know is still there.
Sure. When I'm in men's group, I'm really working on just trying to let intuition guide me when working with other, instead of using concepts or theories or whatever. And I find that it is much more powerful to trust in that than it is to apply, some theory.
Right. And I want to talk about theory with all of you. Jim, can you say just a little bit about what theory is to you? And what the attraction is?
Yeah, so it's a theory framework, a mental map, I guess, that allows me to predict what's, if I do this, then something's going to happen. If I go there, then I expect to see this.
And do you say the theory is, in a way, hypothesizing? In my experience, the whole head center is projecting one way or another. And the 6 uses projection as their primary strategy. But 5s will use speculation, and it's a variation on projection and hypothesizing, not necessarily going with a definite answer the way the 6 tries to do, but it's out there and you're speculating a lot.
Sure. I more and more I ask questions. Like something will hit me as maybe likely something. And so I'll ask. Whereas before I would decide, I would project something I'd read Does that make sense?
Yeah. And then that would become a way for you to have self-sufficiency and expertise so that you couldn't be misled or overpowered.
Yeah.
Generally, knowledge as a defense strategy is to avoid, to have something, but also to avoid a negative experience. And I liked the way Ichazo described the head center as needing know-how, that the gut center, which he called the instinctual triad of conservation, is about the historical ego, what is felt in the body, what the ego remembers, like even where to get a resource that's needed, and even recognizing when the angle of light changes, that, oh, that's when that particular thing is available. And it could be a mile walk, let's just say in primitive times, but it's like knowing it at a visceral level. Whereas the heart center, which he called relation, is like, who do I need to know well enough so that they will protect me rather than steal from me, take my stuff. And so the heart types are focused on the relationship they need to have in every given situation and what they need to sacrifice and give up of their true self to have that security. And so an image that is desirable helps them achieve that. But the head types are focused on, how do I do something? And in the case of surviving and needing a certain, let's say something as simple as food, the 5 will observe, like, let's say the fish or the fox or the pheasant, whatever it is, they'll study what that species does and when and how, so they can figure out a way to hunt successfully. Now, the 6 will ask people when they're little kids, wait, how do you do that? Can I do that? How do I do that? There'll be a lot of questioning. And the 7 relies on their ability to have rapport so that, yeah, the 5 will teach them how to fish, or they'll have a group of people who say, oh, yeah, like, you want to include me. I'm so much fun. That's kind of unconsciously what's going on. But the 5 does it on their own because they study. So when we talk about being smart, any type can be smart, but the 5 is focused on the study of whatever interests them. They must know everything they can about it. And it's enjoyable. It's not painstaking. Yeah.
Yeah, on that. So I'm not a 7 because I don't have enough energy to like bounce around and try this and try that and try this and try that. And I'm not a 6 because I don't trust anybody. And so that leaves me with trusting myself.
Right. So think of the head center as how to, like seeking or creating the reference book or instruction manual. And that's more where the 5's attention goes. It could be building robots, or it could be classifying plants or creatures, but it's that big picture, little picture, and wanting to know all the permutations, all the details about whatever they're interested in. So it's pleasurable. Arthur, how do you identify with self-sufficiency or emotional entanglements and theories?
Well, my theory about theories is they're just an approximation to the truth or reality, essentially the closest lie to the truth or the reality, because it's going to be updated, further observation and knowledge. So theory always changes. Shouldn't really have too much faith in theory. Better trust your eyes. But theory gives you a lot of power because you can make predictions from theories. And I hate to say, part of the reason I got into the Enneagram or even psychiatry is kind of a defensive art. I really don't have a good sense of people. So I really want to study people, crazy people, normal people. I became an expert on crazy people. But what I found out is that the normal people were far more dangerous. That's what I found out. Actually, the Enneagram is kind of a tool for me to make kind of theoretical, a theory that helps me more approximate the truth and reality of how other people are. I know how I am. I basically use my expertise as kind of a bribe or a gift to others to allow me in a social situation. Because I really don't feel I fit in or really get the vibe, but I actually can bring pearls of wisdom and a certain helpfulness. And people do appreciate that, but it is a bribe, no question about it. It's the price of entry to the social world.
Yeah, it's very different between the social 5 and the sexual 5. I really appreciate you saying that because all socials are trying to find the way they can be included, the service that they need to give to be a part of whatever group they want. It's always the group of the individual's choosing. But looking at it as a bribe is a great word. I thank you for that because it's been stated many different ways, but that touches on the 5 not wanting to be invaded or intruded upon, but needing to be included, the social 5. And so the bribe showed up as you being able to talk about people that was interesting. How did the bribe work?
I guess I can lend some important information and clarity on most issues. Particularly the areas I have depth in, but I have actually a wide fund of knowledge. I mean, oddly, I test out, what was it in, forget the term, but in miscellaneous knowledge. I mean, I remember, taking a test, in medical school and, and they rate you in various fields. And my highest mark was in miscellaneous medical knowledge, because I studied what I wanted to study. I could care less what they were lecturing about, what was in the book. I followed my interest and I have this enormous amount of miscellaneous knowledge. And miscellaneous knowledge is actually kind of important. And, I've made a lot of friends over the years, and actually they're pretty close friends. But I want to make one thing that you kind of stated. I don't like to be dependent on people. And there is a kind of a yo-yo effect where sometimes if I feel too dependent, drawn too close, I want to move away. And I have ended relationships, close and loving relationships, because I felt I was really becoming emotionally dependent. And it wasn't even so much the vulnerability. It was just I needed that, and I didn't like to have I don't want to say it's something that I had no control over.
That's a good way to say it.
Needy. You know what I mean? And I could see the hoarding of a 5. I mean, I have boxes and books, and I have too much of many things, and there's a tendency to want to be self-sufficient.
Always,
So there's always a kind of coming and going of wanting to be with other people and including in the group, but not wanting to be dependent on them.
5 and 8 are the most inclined to want that self-sufficiency and the autonomy and not have entanglements. They're the least expressive. They can be very loving, but 5 and 8 aren't going to show emotion in the same way. It'll be rare if one does, but if they've done a lot of work or they have a different tritype. So in this case, you have the 5 and the 8, which amplifies the need to not be dependent. And the 2 and the 8 means you're going to be interested in people, though. The 2 is focused on what others are doing. And maybe that's why you came up with such a great word, the bribe. Because 2s are consciously or unconsciously aware of the fact that they need to earn the right to be given to, and socials experience that regardless of the type. So what happens if things go awry and you feel uncomfortable in a group? Or do you jettison out of it, or do you try to make it work? Do you ever return to a group or relationship that you've left?
I almost leave that to other people to discuss. I will make some effort, but beyond a certain degree, I withdraw. And also, sometimes my effort is a little more combative than it should be, and that I think that people are not seeing things correctly or understanding me or understanding the situation. I try to kind of forcefully present my view, and that doesn't always help calm the situation. In some ways, in the end, it might be like, well, I think we should part. I really am not dependent on you. You know what I mean? I have other resources and other people. Maybe this will cool down. And sometimes I go back to it, or somebody comes back to me. And I'm actually open to that. I mean, I have people who come back into my life and thank me for something or other when I'm actually going like, I was kind of an asshole. I don't know why you're thanking for me for what I did for you or what I did for your kids. I could have done much more. In fact, I was withholding quite a bit of what I could do. So I find that kind of strange, but people do come back into my life.
Tell me about the withholding, like what you withheld. Kids, as you're referencing, because that is part of 5. Again, that retentiveness and the holding in.
What am I withholding?
Yeah, you said it, that you could have done more for those kids, but you were holding
sure.
back.
I'm trying to think of how I would say it. I could have given them more stuff. Anything from cars to houses, material stuff. I could have given them actually more time. Sometimes I focused so much on work that I never thought that, some boring time with the kids what they would want from me. I was going like, well, I can take you on these fantastic vacations. I can buy you this or that you want, you know. But the kind of like actual moving from a kind of a work focus to a parenting focus or caring focus is a little difficult. It's easier for me when it's a dog or a cat or a small child, but I'm also not very demonstrative or affectionate. And actually, I think that hurt the children. I think they really wanted more hugs. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I wasn't
unless
that
it
kind of
was
a person.
child. Some children don't.
Some children don't.
Yeah, but yeah, that's safe to say. Probably in the case you're thinking of, that it would be true, because most children do.
Yeah.
Thank you. And it's also important because we think of the two as.
I'm going to go one thing that I find it, I don't know if this is a man thing or a five thing. I find it very difficult to tell people I love them. I might say I miss you, but simply telling someone I love them is just an infrequent occasion.
Because
even if I feel it. I mean, it's just.
Okay, so even if you feel it. So when you feel it or have felt it, why do you not say it?
I feel it's partly, I think it's cliche. Plenty of people tell you they love you, and it's just, a little manipulation or social thing. Partly, I hate admitting the vulnerability.
That's just what I was going to say, because when 5 and 8 come together, that's usually the case. Whatever your vulnerability is, you would hate to admit it or have it expected. That's the other thing, is the 5s don't want expectations that they haven't agreed to. No one does, but in the case of the 5, as Jim mentioned, it's overwhelming, and emotional overwhelm is what is at the root of the 5. And if you're emotionally overwhelmed internally, others may not know it. A lot of times they do, but 5s feel just as many emotions as any other type. It's just the identification and defense strategy is very different. So being less demonstrative is a characteristic of 5. As a 5 with 8 and 2, it brings this desire for people while still being autonomous. So it's like ill at ease to be this combination in one way. And in other ways, it gives you perspectives that many other people would not see. And with the Tritype, it's not the 3 types, one in each center. It's what happens when the 3 types come together and what is amplified and minimized. So with being a social 5, which is already a little different because the stereotype of 5 is self-pres. And then with 8, there's just more resistance to feeling that you have to do anything. But the 2 still wants the engagement, still needs the people. So it's a fascinating Tritype. And then the INTP can just quickly have a new idea or shift. And if you have 5 and 8 and 2, it could be an abrupt comment or attitude that could change later.
I know there's a great deal of resistance to being told what to do. Even when somebody has a good idea of how to manage, say, some people or solve a situation, I really dislike being told what to do. And it may take me a month or a week or something to come to the conclusion that person's right. And in the meantime, they're quite pissed with me because whatever I'm pushed, I kind of resist. That's as something in my structure, I just don't like to be pushed. I don't know if anybody likes to be pushed, but I assume a 9 gives way. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, they don't like it either, by the way, but they'll handle it physically and emotionally a little differently. Whereas the 5 will flare up, bristle. Jim's word is really great. They'll bristle. And the other thing is that when there is a need to be self-sufficient, the enemy would be dependency, which is why you're not alone. Many 5s that are social in particular have reported feeling like if they get too close, that it feels dangerous, that then they're obliged. And even if they really care, the feeling of obligation in a way they don't want to have to meet, because unconsciously, before it was explored, they felt that what if that was a time when they wanted to pursue something really interesting, and then that's when the obligation came up, and it creates kind of a tightening in the 5, like the holding in becomes more felt. It's not unlike 1, because 5 and 1 share the line of control, needing control. And the 5 wants to control their world. And the 1 wants to control what people are doing in the world to perfect it. The 5 would sacrifice a part of themselves to have that freedom again and lack of obligation. Naranjo described it as a social 5 in particular, that he'd rather cut off his hand than be trapped in a way that he didn't want to be. So symbolically, like, a bear trap or whatever, we'd rather just sever it.
I've had friends tell me that I'm kind of one-ish at times. And I can see what you're saying. I don't think of myself as one-ish, but there is a part of me that is trying to control my world. I think everybody's trying to control their world, but
yeah, the 1 just goes outward, and the 5 is doing inward. And to control your inner world, you have to push back a world that could be intruding upon you.
What I also find disheartening looking back is that the idea of not getting obligated or committed. Honestly, I could have been more obligated and committed to people. And I chose not to because I wasn't required to. So even if I felt like, well, maybe we should get married or we should start a family, it would be like there's no reason to obligate or commit yourself to this situation other than an emotion. And to go on emotions would be kind of unsettling ground to me.
That's a great way to say it, that emotions can be unsettling. You're going to find it's a little different with the sexual 5s, and we'll come back to that. But thank you. Great, great, great data, information on 5 and the inner workings of the 5. Arlen, what do you relate to? I'm going to ask you about your emotions, but
before you do that, may I, because I took notes.
Yes, please.
Okay. So there were a couple of words, and then, so iconoclast was 1 and arrogant is another. So I've combined them in my own personality. I'm iconocaustic. So if somebody gets in my way, I try not to get involved. I try to back off. But if they pursue, got to stop them dead. And that's it. Okay.
Oh, Oh, hold on.
Also,
thank you. It's so important because this is a quality of 5 that people don't understand. And the 5 is very strong at resisting, even like moving, if they feel like the energy is that way. And if control is coming in, yeah, you're going to stop them dead. That's very true. Carry on.
Okay. So the mention that he couldn't multitask. I can't not multitask. I suffer from, I don't know if you know the term FOMO, FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yep.
I believe that's the social thing.
It is.
So, I mean, I get so many.
And the interest. 5 loves what they're interested in.
Exactly. And we shine when we disclose it, sometimes disclose it to others, but not to everyone. So that's part of that stinginess, which I excel in.
It's originally called ego stinge for the frugal, stingy nature of 5.
And that's part of a self-sufficiency aspect there. So I'm a very, very strong believer in barter. Okay, for a number of reasons. Number one, it forces me to use whatever's left of the brain. Okay, I can get stuff. Also, again, 5-ish, very self-limiting. So I don't want to have anything that's going to get in the way, anything that's important. There's nothing, I'm not interested in possessions. I'm interested in being able to get out as soon as I can. Okay. So also, question man. So I have a very strong 6-wing counterphobic, and sometimes that comes up higher. Your last test I took, 6 came like 1 over the 5, but in any event, and sometimes I'm a little confused with that whole thing. But
you mean there was a special notice, or it actually the results showed 6 over 5?
It showed the results, and I've seen that before.
It can happen with the social 5. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I said, but one of my nicknames was the question man. So the combination of the 5 and the 6 are really, really strong there. Oh, back to self-sufficiency. So I love to recycle. I love to compost. I wait, the garbage men come on Monday morning, and I wait. I have to go out and I have to dump it into the garbage. Makes me actually feel as if I'm doing something, even though they're not composting, but I'm still doing it.
Yeah, so that's social too, needing to make that contribution.
Yeah.
For the good feelings. All of us, the good feeling comes from meeting the compulsive need that our type, instinct, and Tritype have. It's just that simple. So it gives you a good feeling, so you do it.
Yeah. And as for groups, I'm not interested in too many groups. I don't necessarily want to be part of the group unless it's something I really believe in. So like Enneagram groups or astrology, any of the typologies, the vegan group, and then because of major traveling. So it's all kind of, I love ethnics. I never really liked American food or the people that much, especially now. So those are the interests I have. When people say, well, you meet all kinds of people. I said, I don't go to these groups to meet anybody. I go to the groups because they're of interest to me. I'm interested in meeting the people who will have and here's the word, information for me. Okay, so that's
you're interested in having, and would you say that the personal interaction, or now it's Zoom, rather than knowing it in your own mind or having found it in the written word or on the internet, is one way to learn, but to actually be in the experience, you gather a lot more data, a lot more information.
I definitely learn better from a teacher and one-on-one. I'm always like the minute I met you or even on the phone, I'm offering to be your assistant.
You did.
It's not about ego. If anything, I'm trying to pick your brains and stuff like that. But to barter something, so I barter food or I do, whatever it is. And so it's a win-win situation as I see it. Now, another word came up, which was expectations. And whoa, that's a hard one for me. I've only in the last few years have I tried to give up on expectations because 90% of the time they will not be met. And then I'm highly annoyed, putting it nicely. So, and also that's part of the dependency. And now I'm dependent upon my own stupid expectations that I have there. So I've tried to keep myself free and clear of anybody's pressure, because the worst pressure is the pressure that I put on myself. And I understand, and I tell people, look, I know you're not doing this. I'm doing it, but it's still, it's still rough. And maybe I don't necessarily react in the best way for that. And on that thing, also, see, I don't want to owe anybody anything. And I take that neither a borrow nor lend a be, but also in anything even similar, because the word here is that I don't want to owe anyone anything. I do not want to be beholding. Okay. It's not, because it's always going to be in the back of my mind. Like, wow, I owe him this, I gotta do this, and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not happy about that. And I think that
takes important space that the 5 wants, again,
right,
to attend to other things. And it's hard. I liked the way Naranjo explained that too. Being the 5 is that he just can't get it out. If it's nagging at him, then he didn't have the defense of denial. So he'd have to not create scenarios where he would be beholden. He used that word too.
That's my list. You're up.
Great. Okay. So what I want you to talk about is what theory means to you.
I'm sure I took notes. Well, basically, it's just, I believe mostly, I'm not completely convinced. I certainly want this to be true, that there is a plan of the universe. Now, that to some people might be God, to other religion, this and that. I began all of this as an astrologer, and that's how I got interested in everything. And all I know is that there's something that's working there. I don't know who is in charge, but I got past that. So at this point, it doesn't matter. There is some kind of an overall plan. Problem is that not everything fits neatly and nicely as the way I would like it to be.
Thank you. One of the ways 5s can have a dilemma, you have a theory and you've looked at all the moving parts that you can see or recognize, and you kind of make a conclusion, which can take a while because you always know there are variables that are unknown. I like to call them lurking variables because you don't even know what they are. But then there's the point at which, okay, this is how it works, whether it be the Enneagram or MBTI or astrology, any typology. But there'll always be people or situations that don't perfectly fit. And it's what you do with that. Like Naranjo would say when he was evaluating people, he gave the analogy of having a sand sifter, and then people would go right through and land in their type. And most people did it very easily. But then there'd be these types that he just couldn't name, and it took longer and subtleties. And it wouldn't be based on health or unhealth, although the healthier person, you don't see the acting out behavior as much. But he also shared that as a 5, he wanted to like just push someone through that sand sifter, breaking up the sand more, because when you have an elegant typology or system, it brings a way to know the world. And whatever that is for the 5, it's unsettling, to use the phrase used earlier, rather. Unsettling is uncomfortable. And if your whole schema has something in it with a problem, then what are you going to do with it? Because these are exceptions to the rules. What do you do, Arlen, when there are exceptions to the rule?
I get annoyed.
Yeah.
Immediately, and then pretty much from annoyed to avoid. It's a lot of avoidance in my personality. Classic approach, avoidance.
Yeah. And the isolating, moving away
from
what is problematic. Yes. Now, there's something else about the 5 that is noteworthy, and that is there's a fear. There's this desire for expertise, to have a role, place, or position, but there's a corresponding fear of ignorance. And originally, it was thought that the 5 didn't want their own ignorance, and they don't. But the 5 also doesn't like ignorance in other people. And the way they've defined it is, it's one thing to not be exposed to something and not know about it, but to have been given the information multiple times, and let's say a person continues to name something incorrectly, is ignorance in a negative way to a 5, because the information was available and it was brought to the person's attention. And many 5s feel very frustrated by that in others, but really frustrated about it within themselves, that they must avoid ignorance at all costs.
And then you add to that my 1 in the Tritype, and it's murderous. So like there was something before about noise, I believe. And like certain noises bother me. The clicking of gum, okay? The cracking knuckles, Anthony's. Those things just get on my nerve. I'm thinking, I don't know that this is it, but I'm always going to come up with some kind of a story, if not theory, that perhaps in a past lifetime that they were tortured and their knuckles were, that I was in, knuckles were, who knows? I don't know what the story is, but that 5-1 combo is so murderously demanding. I'm very pedantic as well. And you see something. Okay, so at one point, I was a nice Jewish boy from New York. Okay, so I'm watching organizations talking about anti-Semitism. And, I have a lot of pet peeves. Okay, you're working for the organization. The term is Semite, Semite, anti-Semitic. Okay, and you see people on the show, well, it's anti-Semitic. Come on now. If you're working, you should know what you're doing. You're representing. All right. So stuff like that, and all kinds of grammatical.
It's so perfect, because it's pulling together like the social 1, the social 5, and the social 4. You put them all together, and that's why you would view things as you do, and the way people should. Like a lot of times, people that have very strong social instinct will misidentify as 1s. But in my experience now is that they usually have 1 in the Tritype. It isn't just the social instinct, but it's not their lead type in many cases. But yes, whenever we use
I don't see how the social 4 comes into that.
The social 4 is avoiding shame. And the desire is to be connected in some way to the special people that represent their ideals. So whatever in this case, the 5, but if you led with 4, it would be like the Enneagram teachers before they were available. Like the first time we did a conference for the IEA, I was on the planning committee, and we invited teachers and authors to come and describe how they defined the types. And there was a social 4 that was on the committee, and she didn't feel at ease. So there's an awkwardness and a dis-ease being with her peers, but she would know how to be with an elite person because she could be in the role of helping them and doing for them. So it's a social role, which fulfills the desire to know those people that match the interest of the 4. But the same is true with 4 and the Tritype for a 5. So you would have a keen interest in learning and having an experience with all the people you admire. Is that true?
Yes, definitely.
So, but when 4 and 1 are with the 5, there's more of this with the social, but there's also, this swing from doing what you should to rebelling and doing what you want.
Right.
So it has, yeah. Thank you.
Nobody said it would be easy.
Yeah, right. So now I want to talk about kindness, because 5s show kindness in their own way, and 5s are very kind, but people can miss the acts of kindness from a 5. Have you experienced that, Jim? And how are you kind to people? And do you value kindness?
Yeah, I very much do value kindness. I guess I express it in how I treat service people. And animals. Oftentimes I will do. So when I was working and somebody needed some help, like to know how to do something or something they couldn't do, I was always available.
Yeah, availability. Yeah. Carry on.
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything else to say on that topic.
Let's look at it from its other perspective. How do you feel about a lack of kindness or unkindness, like if you witness it? What do you do? Do you separate from it? Do you have a lot of thoughts about it?
Unkindness. I think it kind of depends on the context.
For sure. Go ahead.
So, if I see somebody being unkind to their child in the grocery store, I won't intervene, but I'll have some judgments about that. Yeah, I think in most cases I would just have a judgment about it, but not do anything.
Yeah, the thing is that even if you did something, it could backfire for the kid later. which
yeah, I mean, I always have a rationalization for why I don't do anything,
but actually it is true. But judgment is an important part of 5. It's just there's more flexibility in your judgments. They will vary more than a 1's judgments, or someone that's a 5 with 1 in the Tritype.
Yeah, and I think I've tried to discern what the difference between the 5 and the 1's judgment, and it's so for me, it's not. It's maybe less personal. It's like for things to work well together in the universe, people need to be kind.
Right.
Yeah, so it's more of a, I don't know, more theoretical or something.
Exactly. And that was going to be my next question, is how you see theory.
Yeah, so it's, whereas I think for a 1, it's more, well, this is wrong. And it's more of a moral thing, whereas this is more of a pragmatic, I guess. It's if everybody were kind to everybody, things would work better, and everybody would be happier. It would be a better world to live in, and so you shouldn't be unkind. But it's yeah.
I mean, it's also the way a 5 with 9 in the Tritype is going to manage the disruptive elements of people being unkind, because then they're emotional entanglements or judgments. But the 5-4-9 is going to be thinking about it, but really want things to be, as you said, working in a way, and kindness would be one of the factors that would make it all work better.
Yeah.
But you're right. You are explaining it from a theoretical perspective.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in people that I'm close with in that context, I will take stronger stances. So in my men's group, one of the men, his son was doing things to, well, he's divorced. He has a girlfriend, and his son was doing things that were having the effect of causing real problems in his relationship with this woman. And I came out very strong about that. He does not get to dictate to you. And there was moral conviction, and I had no problem intervening as much as I could because of care. And
right.
Yeah. And so that was personal. Whereas somebody in a grocery store or something, I'm not likely to get involved. I had a girlfriend who was a 6'4", 8", and she would get involved without ever, without any hesitation. So.
Yep, that's it. And theories in general.
Theories in general.
Yeah, do you speculate and have theories and then test your theories?
Yeah, I studied philosophy, then I studied cognitive psychology, and I came to the conclusion that all theories have their usefulness and their limitations. So they're very much like maps. And, you have road maps to help you drive around, and you have topo maps if you want to hike. And, and a topo map isn't better than a road map. And so that was kind of when I lost my enthusiasm for, really coming up with the perfect theory. They're not the end all. And at the end of the day, what I'm seeing is more important than what the theory predicts.
Yeah.
Don't
and at what age, Jim, did you
notice
that theories were, at what age did they start where you felt theories were important? And then what helped you shift your perspective?
When I thought they were important was probably in high school.
And do you know why? What occurred to you? Was it because they were formulas, or like you say, a map? Or a lot of times fives enjoy coming up with theories.
I can't really pinpoint anything, but I know that by the time I was out of high school, I really thought that there was some, overarching map of things, some overarching thing that was true, and I could discover what it was, and that would be a guide.
Yep. The 649 is the seeker and wants to find all those things. So you're right next door, and you have two types that are like the seeker. You're just one variable different. And there's going to be a similar focus, but the 5 will prevail rather than the 4 or the 6, because the 6 is really created because of the tension between its two wings. It's always in motion. And like in this case, the 5 is going to the 4 wing and back, and going to the 6 wing and back, and going to the line of connection and back, and the other line of connection and back. So it ends up like a piston. And towards and away, there are 8 movements, and the type is the center movement. So it falls into the theory that the Enneagram was based on was 9. Wholeness, in numerology, 9 is completion. And yet it's divisible by 3 and is made up of the law of 3. So it's very important to realize, as a 5, you're always trying to negotiate the space and what you should or should not do according to your wings. Now, the 5 directs it, but it's always in motion. It used to be thought that we had one wing and not the other. And then in my first research, it became clear to me that people had both wings, but that one was internalized and the other was externally expressed. And that still can be seen or understood. But then when I studied with Naranjo, and he said it's the tension, and then that moves around the Enneagram. So each type is managing the perspectives of the types on either side, and then the resolution is to manage those differences. So the 4 wants to go into the emotion and into the world of thinking and feeling and giving meaning to suffering. And then the 6 is looking at, well, who knows what, and how can I determine who's credible, who's not credible, and who can I trust, who's safe, and how do I engage with others? So they're 2 very different worlds. And the 5 is holding that space, but there'd be parts of you as a 5 that would be moving towards your 4, and especially since you have 4 in the Tritype, and also moving towards 6. And you said you didn't trust anyone. So it's there, is what I'm saying. And in your case, because you have 4 in the Tritype, the 4 is more amplified for you.
Yeah.
But we're always in motion. That's why Naranjo said he was misquoted with the lines of connection, that he never meant to imply that you go to 1 in health and 1 when you're fixated. He thought about it potentially being, now this would be his idea of a theory, that maybe it was harder to go against the arrows and easier to go with the arrows, and that the growing edge, so to speak, was going against the arrows. And that's how this concept came into being of what our lines of connection mean. But actually, they're, to be our type, they're always in motion all of the time, positively, negatively, and our wings as well. So it's like pistons that are carefully working together. And it's not like one stops and it isn't used when we're feeling happy and then the other expands more, or we're only using one when the energies are negative, that we're always using both. Just like it doesn't have to be negative for the 5 to be in 7 or 8. It's just always happening. The interests of 5 and 7 sound very similar. That the definition of wanting your world the way you want it is 8. And that's just a part of 5. And you're always going to be doing all of the above, the wings and the lines, positively or negatively. If the system, those 9 elements are up, then they'll all be up. And if they're down, they'll all be down. So yeah, and being the INXP amplifies the 4, because INFP is very, let's say X, but the F would be in there to be close. But either way, it's a description that is very like type 4. It's creative, many factors. So thank you very much, Jim. Arthur, how do you feel about theories and ignorance? What are your thoughts on that? As a 5.
I don't tolerate stupid or incompetent people well.
Neither do 8s, so good.
Carrying
on with your Tritype.
That's a fact. And I think, since I'm not a great teacher, but I'm a pretty quick learner, when I explain something to people, even if I haven't explained it too well, I mean, I've skipped a lot of details that I think are obvious. I remember one professor in mathematics who would do math proofs, and he would do a few lines of it and would say the rest is obvious. And I always wanted to choke him because the rest was not obvious. But I think I might do the same thing occasionally when I'm explaining things and leave out some intermediate steps that to me are obvious at this point. So I can be quite critical when people don't catch on to what I'm saying or how something is done. And I might be somewhat at fault as being a poor teacher. I guess that's what I'm saying, is that I don't tolerate people who are slow in learning. Well, I would not make a good special ed teacher at all.
Yeah, your combination doesn't end up there either.
No.
Sometimes your Tritype will end up helping people the way your profession called for as a psychiatrist, but also maybe working with the underprivileged and fighting for them. Then the 5 is fiercer, but generally the best fight is going to be mental in some way. And what the knowledge you would find that could be helpful, that little kind of the domino theory that if you get that thing, you can prevail. If you know what to find and you find it. So it shows up a little differently than other types, but because the 8 and 2 are so definite, then there's more kind of, more energy coming out of your Tritype than 5s with 9. And if we compare you to Jim, you both have 5, but Jim has the sexuals, so his focus is going to be different. He's going to be focused on being desirable to those that he wants to intrigue, so to speak. And the 4 is the withdrawn heart type that is pulling people towards them rather than moving towards, whereas your 2 moves towards others, outward, and you lead with the social, which is what you need to do to belong. And then the 8 is kind of moving against, whereas his 9 is trying to find that neutral place, universal place. So you're both 5s, but energetically, you could come across very differently. But then the strategy of using information.
But I will say one thing that I just hate to interrupt you, but
No problem.
I've noticed when I've come across 8s in kind of like a battle of wits or dominance in an institution, I have a lot of energy, but they tire me. There is no comparison to the amount of energy an 8 can put out versus me on my best day. I mean, it is, they wear you out. Simple as a fact.
They are wearing, that's for sure. But your Tritype will end up there. But those that wear you out that have the same Tritype are leading with 8 or 2. Because 2s take pride in helping people. And if they have 8 and 5, then they're a slightly more intellectual 2. Because 2s would rather make decisions based on emotions, how they feel about things, than impersonal and rational concepts don't lead to important information to them. They can look at it, but their final decision will be based on what they feel emotionally because they trust that. Thank you. Arlen, how about you? You relate to this need to avoid feeling ignorant and the need to fully understand things that bother you in your life?
It's a lousy thing for a teacher because but I'm a very good tutor for someone who doesn't need one. So if you're advanced and you know what it is, I'm going to have all those extra nuances and stuff like that. Or if you know absolutely nothing, then I'm good because I have I'll use the word theory, but I have the plan and the way to do it. And so I taught languages. So pedantic and grammar, as I showed before. So I try not to deal with anybody who has, well, how do I put this now? Not the inability, but the lack of interest in learning. That's a bad one for me. If you don't really care, then, I'm I'm not happy. But at the same point, realistically, if we're talking about, well, how does this engine run? Or as I said at the beginning, electrically or whatever, then I'm even worse than they are. So I can't be too hypocritical on that. But I do have a question completely out of this. Well, not completely. I still do not understand the term totem.
Oh, well, totem is used because it's the stacking of,
right,
and the social 5 wants to be included and at the top of that stacking. We could think on a symbolic level that the 5 is like the wise person in the tribe, the wise person in an organization or in a family group.
right.
And so the 5 needs to be the top. And I've had situations in coaching where a 5 was that person. And then there's a new brother-in-law that is knowledgeable, and the 5 loses that kind of role because social is identifying the role that you need to have for security. And that he said it was ridiculous, that he was distressed by it, but it made up a lot of his identity. And he realized that by understanding this unconscious fear, why it could be so disruptive to him, he needed to be that person. He had earned it. He had put his time and energy into it. And to lose it to someone that he did admit was knowledgeable, but didn't have the complex thinking that the 5 has, but like the people liked it better. And it was disconcerting. Do you relate to that? Losing
Somewhat.
control as a wise person?
Yeah, somewhat. But at the same point, if I'm on top of the pole or on top of anything, there's a good chance I'm going to fall off or get knocked off. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that as my first pun, and I've been a good boy because you would have gotten a million puns from me, was about being iconocaustic, because I'm afraid from experience that to get to that point, I'm going to be pushing, and I don't want to do that, but it comes naturally. I said, I'm a boy from New York, and in growing up, you never showed weakness, you never showed vulnerability, and so you came up with this persona of either, in my case, of not caring. So that was easy enough. But the
New York is an 8 state overall. New York and Texas are very individualistic in that way.
The city, though, I thought was a 3.
I don't think so.
No, but
I would give it the Tritype
somebody else said
of 8, 3, 7.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I do have another question, or maybe not a question, a statement. Years and years and years, I'm reading about how we don't have energy. If there's anything I have is way too much energy, because I stimulate myself mentally. I stimulate myself, and that gets me all excited. So I have the energy to do what I want, to go where I want, within reason, of course. And so I don't know. I mean, a lot of this,
Talking about the way life limits that. And the 5 has that excited energy for what they want to pursue.
Right.
And so they're really talking about not wanting to have that dissipate or lose it in any way. The other thing is that 5s initially, before they know anything in life, think of themselves as small, even if they're tall, and that their boundaries are permeable. Both 5 and 4 feel sensitive to other people's energy. But 5s do report they want the energy for themselves. And that
True.
It's not that they don't have energy, but if they have a bunch of limitations imposed upon them, that it's exhausting.
Thanks for clarifying that. Also on the totem. So what I, quote, made up, but it made sense to me, is that inside that totem pole are the secrets. It's a little bit like the Russian dolls, where you get one and the other one. And again, always looking for the more than quintessence, the centessence, I guess, of things. And there it is. It's hidden in that. So I made it up, but I enjoyed it.
No, it's great because it's also pointing to the way the 5 holds power is by knowing secrets and collecting secrets. And if you think throughout history, some of the best ministers to the king or the emperor were 5s, because 5s would either read people or gather information that then could be used one way or another. So inside are the secrets. It's perfect, actually. This is great.
I remember going with my son. We went to visit King Tut's tomb, the actual tomb, and we were told it's cursed. So anything I've done wrong, it's King Tut's fault. I'm innocent.
Thank you. Now, what I want to ask each of you is if you ever thought you were another type, and then how you knew it was 5. And if there's something that I haven't brought up about 5 and the emotional nature of 5, I would like you to add it.
I always, not always, but for a number of years thought that I was a 1 because I'm a pain in the ass. I'm very pedantic. Well, you heard all of it, so you can see here the one part. Everything's got to be right. My sister gets on my case because I say there's one way of making guacamole, okay? And it has this and that. Now, I'm never saying it's my way. No, that's not it. There is a way, an overarching, what was used before, way. There's a recipe for how it's done and whatever. So also, and I was told by people, they looked at me and they laughed. And they said, you look at the way you dress. You couldn't care less about anything that anybody thinks of you or how you do it. Now, I personally, as well, I'm going to make a broad statement here. I would imagine many men are especially attracted to 4 women. And they're crazy enough, because I'm a character, that they're sort of interested. But I'm the worst thing they could ever find. And I had a girlfriend in San Francisco, and we were outside in the street just hanging out, and a bunch of people walked by across the street, and she was so embarrassed. She didn't know these people, didn't mean anything, but like it's always that you know, on the surface or whatever. So I have a lot of trouble with them. But to me, this goes back to the question of kind. Okay, so the kindness I find, for me anyway, the most kind people are the 9s. Who else would put up with my crap? Basically, and they're just warm and whatever. So now, how did I deal with this? I guess I'm going back to the kind question. But anyway, again, I volunteer for everything. volunteer@large@yahoo.com. Don't forget me. So
thank you. Don't forget me is really at the heart of a head type and social coming together.
It's interesting. That's interesting. I'll have to think about that. Anyway, so I volunteer for I will volunteer for anything unless it's something I don't believe in. But with kind and kindness, I used to volunteer at a place called Kindness Kitchen. And what we did was we served serve food. It has to be vegan, of course, right? Would serve food out to the public, and that was the way I worked with it. In the vegan world, the old story was that there were three types. This is the old story. The one that I am, which is the stomach vegan type. So that's about our own health and food and whatever. Then there's the animal rights people. So I mean, I believe in it, but it's not my focus. So when there's an event, I'll be in the kitchen, okay? And then, this doesn't hold anymore because it's everybody. Then there were the environmentalists, and the speech was that they were more interested in the packaging than the food. But what would happen was the quality of the food, once the focus was off, was horrible. So anyway, yak. So,
well, it is the nature of social five. So it's, right. You're giving actually a very good bird's eye view. So, and yes, a lot of strong socials will relate to one, or if they just know they're critical and express their critical points of view. And fours have a passion for protest, and sixes are going to challenge the bad authority by grouping with others. So the five is really dealing with those issues at the same time. That's what makes five. So
okay, sorry.
No. So you expressed it very well.
Let the fours write the protest songs. All right. The six will be out there, and I'll be either correcting the grammar or we're looking up information. So you're convinced that I'm social because there've been questions about it. And understand everyone there, social but not sociable.
Yeah, because the dichotomy of five is sociability, social, unsocial. And the dichotomy of the social instinct is social, antisocial. So the five, that's the social instinct, is a very dynamic energy. Yes, indeed.
I'll just stick with the asocial.
Yeah, there you go.
That'll be it.
Thank you, Arlen. Let's go to Jim.
What's the question again?
Any type you thought you were landed on five, and what made you decide on five?
Yeah, I thought I was somewhere like halfway between a 4 and a 5. 4 because whatever I do, it has to be unique. It has to be special. It has to be different. I had a kind of a wake up once at a high school reunion, and I'm leaving, and some people are putting away chairs. And it suddenly struck me, why am I not helping put away the chairs? Well, it's just not special. I mean, I would have done anything to help as long as it was unique, as long as it was something nobody else could do. But, and I've just noticed that, I'm writing academic papers. I had this battle with my boss. I was supposed to write this paper, and I would put a little unique spin on it, and she'd take the spin off and give it back to me, and I'd put the spin back on, and she'd take it off. And finally, I just said, I'm not going to write any more papers for you. So that was that. If I can't be unique, I'm not going to do it. So, yep. I thought that made me a 4, but when I really looked at the core fear of being overwhelmed and having to manage my life in such a way that I could sort of predict what's going to happen, I could keep it manageable, that convinced me I was a 5.
And thank you for saying that, because we can behave similarly. We can have good or bad behavior, but the Enneagram is the only typology based on motivations and a defense strategy. So a lot of people will say, oh, yeah, I'm motivated by that because my brother did that to me. And I go, no, it doesn't work that way, because it's about you, not the outside element. And it's the defense strategy, what we do to manage it. And it's very different between the 5 and the 4. And the 4 needs to be away and showing emotional distress to draw people towards them, because people naturally will support someone in distress. The expression on the eyes, the posture, all of that is in our hindbrain, and we are inclined to do that. But having said that, the 4 is programmed that way so that they don't have to give up their autonomy or their intellectual nature by submitting. So the 4 does not submit, and they protest, even if they're going to come off badly, and then they hate it because they feel shame. It's very complicated. But what you're talking about is a 5's defense strategy, which is to manage it, manage the emotions. 4s need to learn that. It's a good thing if they can get that in their life, because they seesaw back and forth between wanting to be taken care of, but wanting to have the freedom to call the shots. And it rarely happens that way. If you're dependent, you're expected to submit. And so with the 5, no, you have to be self-sufficient. Thank you.
So the other reason I thought I wasn't a 5 was because the stereotypical description of being unemotional and stoic and hiding behind whatever, that was never true of me.
The 5s do like to observe without being seen observing.
Yeah.
That part is true.
But it was the stereotype of the professor with
it's awkward.
Sorry, Arthur.
Awkward.
With facial hair and glasses and long hair and like hiding behind some sort of mask of and that's never been me.
Yeah, exactly. And that's because you're the sexual, and it gets very complicated when we're comparing the sexual and 4, because the language is almost identical. And 4 was described before the subtypes were created by Naranjo. And he realized that actually the instinct is more accurately describing the descriptions of 4, because 4 wants the connection, but it's a different kind of connection. If they're sexual 4, they want the same kind of connection. So we always have to define the word connection, because socials can want connection. It's just we're going to describe it differently. But that it's the sexual instinct that needs to be unique and singular to attract a mate of their choosing.
Right.
And if you're commonplace or fitting a general mold, you're not going to have a chance. But then the decision making will be based on where there's someone in alignment, in sync.
Yeah.
And that will be the determining factor.
I was never it wasn't trying to be physically attractive. That was never the thing, but my sparkling personality and cleverness and that sort of thing was what
gives you desirability.
yeah, that gave me desirability. And I would use it.
Essential.
I would use it.
Essential to the sexual instinct.
Yeah.
Is being desirable. And it's destabilizing when we're not. Yeah. And it's not being sexy. That's more self-pres. But there will be a sexiness by the way the energies connect and the movement rather than overt sexuality. It's a very distinct difference. But it was assumed because the word sexual was used that it would be the higher focus. But the problem is the sexual instinct wants intimacy, that energy, that sexual energy and love together. And long before puberty, the sexual type was trying to create that union fusion with someone in their world. And it's very distressing to a sexual if they grew up and no one in their family or extended family was another sexual subtype. They felt unknown. And the sexual subtype wants to be known. And you can only do that privately. But once you're known and you have several people that are known, then all of a sudden the group, you feel good with it. If they're all people that you know on a personal, individual level.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I probably should just do a talk on how 4 and sexual fall out and why people can misidentify as 4s, especially the 6, because 6 is the most emotional type on the Enneagram. And so they think they're 4s, but 4s have moods that they've given personas to, and there's a creation of that persona, whereas the 6 is trying to hide those, all the feelings they have, because whatever they're thinking can be seen on their face. So they need to learn mind over matter. It's very different. Thank you, Jim. Okay, Arthur, last but not least, what would you say if there was ever a type that you identified with before you landed on 5? I ask this question in every panel, by the way, so that we as observers can see what it is that helped you know that you were your type. And since I selected all of you and feel that according to the criteria I learned from not just the certification programs, but from Naranjo and from attending an intensive with Ichazo and getting to know the people who taught his courses. So that's where my definition of the types come from. Was that ever the case for you, is what I'm asking? Or did you always know you were 5?
It was kind of obvious. In the original Riso book of personality types, the original name for the 5 was the thinker, okay?
That's right.
I've always thought of myself as a thinker. In fact, I used to kind of think of myself as a disembodied mind. So it kind of fit. And then when I read a little more, the 5 with the 6 wing was called a problem solver. And pretty much, I've always been a problem solver. I think the last thing was just kind of a memory. One time I had a heart attack, passed out in my office, became unconscious. And as I woke up, I couldn't move or open my eyes, but I could think. And I remember thinking, I'm thinking, therefore I must be alive. Descartes' right. I think, therefore I am. And I pretty much assume that nobody in a similar situation would have such a thought. They think about going to the hospital or what's happening, this. But I was going like, Descartes' right. I mean, this is, I think, therefore I am. So it always fit. People have suggested to me, maybe you're a 6, but I'm not a very cautious person. I'm a little too much impulsive, actually, in a way.
Well, you're the bombastic, iconoclastic 5,
Yeah.
which
And some people have
is the same
suggested
as 6.
being an 8, and honestly, I just don't think that I'm sometimes, particularly when I was younger, I would rather go through obstacles than around them. But that was because I had the force and the energy, and it was actually quicker in a way than to go around them. And I really had little regard, for plowing my way. And lastly, like people like David Gray, I don't know if anybody knows him. He always suggests every 5 is a 9. And I was going like, I'm far too much combative and to be a 9, even though I would want to be a 9, but I just don't have it. So there was really never an idea. I always thought I did have a 4 wing. I was a 5 with a very strong 6 wing. But as I went through the Enneagram, as well as having a daughter who's a 4 with a 5 wing, I've realized I have a 4 wing. I may not be creative. I can't draw, do music. If I try to draw, I draw little stick figures. I don't think I have any artistic ability. But actually, I'm very sensitive emotionally. Yeah. I just try not to express it or deal with it. But I'm actually very sensitive emotionally. And I think that's the one thing people don't get about 5s.
Exactly.
That they are sensitive emotionally, whether or not they admit it to themselves or admit it to others, or whether they try to hide it, disguise it. I have a friend who's a 5, who's a stoic, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But underneath it all, he's very much a sensitive man, I think that's, if I was to stress one thing, is we all have both wings. We may live in denial, one wing, but that wing's there. And you should never underestimate the emotional sensitivity of a 5.
Exactly. I'm so glad you said that. And that's why when I do these panels, I'm trying to get at the emotional nature of each type, which is very different than just having you parrot something I want you to learn in terms of the passion, the fixation. That's all valuable. I'm not diminishing that in any way. But understanding the emotional world of each type gives us the opportunity to work with people, engage with people in a way where we depersonalize what feels so personal, especially if it feels negative to us. But if we understand that 5s can be I'll put it this way. Many 5s, most 5s, the stereotype of 5 is they're undemonstrative. And what I'm trying to show is maybe compared to a 2, they are, but they are demonstrative, meaning 5s, in their own way. And it's what they're going to do to have their place in the life they want to have, in the world they want to be in. And that may or may not look like others. And that's why the 5 is thought of as eccentric, because they might work their own hours or study things that are off the beaten path, or be focused on finding spiders that were unnamed and classifying and finding that philosopher's stone, that thing that
the desire to be unique.
Yeah, it gives more meaning to the existence.
Someone was talking about, I think it was Jim, about not wanting to put the chairs away and wanting to do something more significant. And I mean, I cannot do the mundane work, to some extent. It just is so tedious. It's so bothersome. I really can't get it done. But give me something challenging, something interesting, something unique that other people can't do or would find difficult to do. And, that's where I'll excel. I mean, I remember, people would send me the most difficult patients. And it was because they were difficult and I found them challenging. In reality, they were not, I hate to say medicines like McDonald's these days. You flip burgers and you see a lot of people. Really seeing complex people who are difficult is not the way to make a living as a physician. You need to see 80 people who are very simple and put them all on, Prozac or Zoloft or something like that and get on with it, not people who have complicated conditions. But even though I knew it didn't pay, I would take on those kind of cases because I found them interesting and I could do something with it. And help them.
Make a contribution.
But it's that whole idea of doing something unique. I may not be doing something unique artistically, but I could at least do something unique intellectually. And the mundane, the paperwork, the billing, I ran a sleep disorder clinic. That's actually how I made a lot of my money. I really didn't want to see the sleep apnea patients. They were very simple diagnoses, very simple treatments. I wanted to see the insomniacs who were difficult. So in some ways, I farmed out.
Are insomniacs. Go ahead.
So I farmed out the easier kind of work to other physicians who were working with me to see the routine cases. Because I don't want to see the routine cases. So I just have that feeling that fives want to distinguish themselves in some sort of creative kind of mental work, just like the fours, I think, want to distinguish themselves in some ways artistically, or in
yeah, at the very least, their artistic sensibility is important. Whereas the 5 and 4 are the two most intellectual types on the Enneagram. And 4 wins out over 5, but it's a different domain of the emotions. And 5 wins out in the head center because it's the conceptualizing. And in the gut center, it's actually more the 8 because the 8 wants to know what makes people tick. But another way, 8s are just matter of fact. So I'm just trying to say that every type is multidimensional and nothing is random. The wings exist, the lines exist, and soon I'll do a visual on how to see mathematically the tritypes. It's not an add-on. They were always there. It's just we didn't recognize them.
And one concept you mentioned that I never heard of before, or I heard of it in passing and never understood it, the connection between 5 and 1 being a line of control. There is no line between 5 and 1. So when you mentioned that instead of line of control, I was going like, I might have heard this in passing, but I don't get it.
It's that the hexad types, 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7. It's really 6 different types in a way, but the 4 and 8, it's called the line of intensity.
Okay.
And the 1 and 5, line of control. And the 2 and 7, it's the line of connection. And that you're on either end of that line. And it's an invisible line on the Enneagram. It's just represented, the similarities. Now, what's fascinating is that these were taught by Ichazo and Naranjo. Well, Naranjo said he hadn't really taught it until 1996, but he'd learned it from Ichazo. But then, unbeknownst to Ted and Kathy, they decided to use Hornevians, not knowing that Naranjo loved Karen Horney's work, and he kind of built out his understanding of the types. He later said he overused that to determine type, but still, it was foundational. And that would be like any reference to Karen Horney and the Enneagram began with Ted Dobson and Kathy Hurley. But Don really liked it too. So he expanded on it, and then he and Rusty together, and it became more fixed. And then the harmonics are what we're talking about here, that 1 and 5 have this similarity. And then you just have to look at what center is like that, needs control. I mean, what center type, rather. And it's the 3. So that what happens is the 1, 3, and 5 are the most rigid because they need that sense of control as a part of their defense strategy. Then when we're looking at 2 and 7, the connection, and the 7 saying, yeah, I want to connect, but I'm also going to avoid it. And the 2 says, yeah, I can connect, but they also don't really want that full connection because it feels unsafe. They need to be the one creating the nature of the connection. And what type is like that? Wants to connect, wants easy relating? The 9. And then 4 and 8 being the 2 intense types that are managing their aggression. And the 8 says, yeah, no one will ever give me what I want, so I have to take what I need, go after it, and assert for it. And they deny their longing. And the 4 says, oh, I can't go after it. I have to find it within myself and give meaning to my suffering. And they disown their aggression until they learn the Enneagram. It's like, no, I'm not aggressive. But they are, because it's human nature. But anyhow, those became the harmonics, but they evolved separate from one another. Just as when I found that what I now call tritypes, I originally called it 3 types, it was long before trifix was even discussed. But I just thought, yeah, well, okay, this is something I noticed, and people just worked out their problems more effectively if we worked on the core fears, all 3 core fears that they had, no matter what I called it. It was just more effective. And it evolved over time, and it continues to evolve. But yes, thank you for bringing that up, because I'm sure other people.
I understand the intensity of the 8 and 4 and the line of connection, the line of controlling issues between the, say, 5 and 1. But I have a hard time understanding this 2 and 7 connectedness or relatedness.
Yeah, it's the line of connection. So we could also call it the line of emotional manipulation, where the 2 is doing it to have the best outcome, but they're unconscious that they're trying to guide where things go until they learn about the Enneagram. And the 7 knows they're consciously manipulating because they want it to be more fun. They want to be indulged. For a 7, indulging is love. So if they get their way, they're happy. But they have a fear of intimacy. So connection and intimacy are the same in this case, the way they're being described. But it's got to be easy relating. If you think about the 2, the 7, and the 9, they don't want to go into the deep, dark chasms of reality, but the 4, 6, 8 will. And the 1, 3, 5 is like, yeah, they don't want to go in the deep and dark and all the energy that is and extremes. And they don't want to have this light, easy relating. They want to create order and have structure in their own way and according to the center in which they reside. So the tritypes are omnipresent, but the center with the lead tritype governs how that'll show up. Does that make sense? So objectively looking at them, I found it very powerful when Naranjo explained these lines and how they showed up, that everything was multidimensional. He just was describing harmonics without knowing about harmonics. And it was just something I've seen in the last 26 years, is that people can find something. If you study the Enneagram enough, it just keeps revealing more and more and more. And then people know that I've done a lot of studies, and they will be told to contact me, and they'll tell me, I have this great idea. I found this out. And I think it is a great idea. And this is how it was taught by this person, or you might want to talk to this other person who found it as well. And that's what always intrigued me about the Enneagram, is that you will find it elsewhere. It is observable. And if we're operating from the actual defense strategy and core fears, we can really understand a lot, but we have to get the mistypings out of the way. But I even have a way for that by programming certain patterns that the 6 uses and the 9 uses. But there are exceptions. As I said, sometimes the social 5, or someone who identifies with their 6 wing, or if you identify with being a problem solver, you might choose the 6 card. But the 6 cards are the ones I'm constantly finessing, because they don't want to be 6s. So I had to find the way for them to take the card, and I have to keep modifying it, and have for years. Okay, well, I can't thank you guys enough. You've really given so much to my understanding of 5. And I knew you'd be able to define your emotions and what's important to you on an emotional level. And I'm very grateful for that. Very, very grateful. And I thank you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you to the 3 of you, and Suzanne for her contribution. Okay.